So, looking back at the first three phases of the MCU, I just wanted to use that as a guide to rethink what could have been done for phases 4 and 5. And I really think the key here is a bigger focus on quality rather than the amount of quantity, because you really just got way too many projects in Marvel phase 4. And I really think, even though this would have been more of a downtime following the ending in Avengers Endgame and more of a pivot to a new direction, I think would have been better to just really combine a lot of the projects into one rather than getting too many, which is a little bit harder to follow and understand. So, looking at the first two phases of Marvel, you obviously have 5 individual projects in each of those, which were pretty pivotal in setting up the Avengers. And then you, of course, had the first Avengers movie in phase 1 and the second one in phase 2. And then in terms of phase 3, you obviously got a higher volume in terms of the amount of projects, but I would argue that 3 of these 11 were Avengers movies, even though Civil War was titled as a Captain America movie. And then, of course, you had Infinity War and Endgame and a lot of other projects thrown in there, a lot of which were either sequels, or you even have the third Thor movie here. But you do have a couple of new characters introduced here, such as Doctor Strange, Spider-Man, and Black Panther. But also with phase 4, I think maybe a lot of it got very drastically because of COVID. That's why you got a lot of streaming shows. But I still think it would have been better maybe to combine some of these and even just to release some of these as a streaming movie, even if there wasn't as much of a box office push here. So I think what still could have worked, just looking off of what we got already from Marvel's Phase 4 here, I do think Loki Season 1 would have been fine as a streaming show. I think even though the viewership may not be drastic, I do think there are a lot of instances in there that could really set up the MCU going forward, such as expanding on the TVA and obviously Loki's role in addition to that. And you also have a lot of stuff with Kang set up in the Loki show as well. So I don't really think that was a problem. Also, looking at Spider-Man No Way Home, which was really a huge box office movie, despite it still being close in proximity to COVID, even though that was a little bit more after all of that. I think that would have been fine just as it is. Black Panther 2, I still think was a good choice here. I think the plot maybe could have had a little bit of variance. I think a much better fit for the movie would have been to swap both the roles of Shuri and M'Baku. I think M'Baku would have been much better as the new Black Panther. And if you are splitting up the role in terms of the leader and the Black Panther mantle like you do in the movie, I think Shuri would have been interesting as the new leader or queen of Wakanda. And I think along with her intelligence and a lot of her technological innovation, she really could have been great to really continue to excel Wakanda through a lot of her inventions. So I think that would have been neat. And I think M'Baku as a huskier version of the Black Panther would have been a neat addition here as well. And he could obviously carry the mantle going forward. So I think a little bit of differences in the writing to allow for that would have been crucial here. And then in terms of the next Doctor Strange movie or multiverse of madness in WandaVision, and even looking back further to a recent show, Agatha All Along, I think a lot of those concepts would have been better combined into one, and I much rather would have had a Wanda focus for something here. I think this could have been done in a movie. So I think a Scarlet Witch solo film would have been neat here. It could still feature Doctor Strange and a lot of the plot elements that were expanded upon in the multiverse. And you also could have included parts of WandaVision, I would say maybe towards the end of the show, where you do have Agatha. And I think that would have gotten a little bit more publicity than stretching that out between a lot of those projects and a lot of different episodes in WandaVision. And I even think that would have set up Agatha All Along a little bit better in the future. So that would have been the fourth project. I think that could have been part of phase 4. And the last one I would have moved up a little bit, even though we also got that more recently, was Captain America Brave New World. And similar to the Scarlet Witch idea, I think it would have been better to maybe save some of the plot elements from the Falcon and the Winter Soldier for this new Captain America movie, because I think a lot of that gets lost in a lot of those different episodes. And I think obviously with that, you could have Bucky being more of a sidekick or partner-like figure to Captain America. And I also even think Iron Patriot could be a great addition here as well, just due to his connections with the military. And I think maybe a little bit more of a use of the Red Hulk would have been good here. He could have been the primary antagonist, and I think this could have been really great if you also had a little bit more expansion on setting up the new Avengers going forward in that movie. And then in terms of phase 5, similar to the adjustments in phase 4, I think some of the more interesting elements of the third Ant-Man movie is really setting up the story of Kang. But I think some of the other stuff in that kind of falls flat. So I think maybe even a consideration could have been for a villain origin project here. I think just in terms of a movie, you maybe could have just had a Kang the Conqueror movie, and this could really expand on the TVA and the multiverse. It could connect with Loki, of course. And I think that really would have been interesting because you don't really have as many villain-centered projects in the MCU, if at all. And I still think Guardians 3 would have been fine here, just given the success of the first 2 movies. I also think Deadpool and Wolverine would be a solid addition given how well it did in the box office. Loki season 2 would have been pivotal here as well to really set up this timeline going forward. And in terms of what we're getting now, I still really like Daredevil season 1. I think it gets a little lost in terms of a lot of the other projects. And I think even if we're looking at a show like Echo, I think some of that could have been put into Daredevil season 1 just to have a little bit more consistency. But I really think an addition here would be to now do another Avengers movie. I think not doing one in phase 4 would have been enough of a break following Endgame, but I do think given what was done in phase 1 and phase 2, where you had the first Avengers movie in 2012, and then you had the Age of Ultron movie really setting up the Infinity Saga, which is what really put Infinity War in a position to excel in addition to Endgame after that. I think that whole cycle should have been started over here, and I think an Avengers movie at the end of phase 5 would have been a good fit just with the overall consistency of the MCU. And I think if this was Avengers Kang Dynasty, which would have been better to really maximize the use of Kang, but really I think the main focus here is just to combine some of these projects into one, or even just to space them out a little bit more. But I'm really interested to see where the next Avengers movie is headed along with phase 6, but feel free to let me know all of your thoughts on this, and I'll see you later.